Hello, everyone. Now let's get started our panel talk. Oh, so there are so small group of people now we are collaborating each other. So, everyone, welcome to our panel talk, collaborative approaches within the DAO ecosystem. I'm aware that many of you have traveled a great distance from the west side of the world to attend this event, which is held in the east side of the world. Thank you all for being here today and in this afternoon. So let's give a big round of applause for everyone here. Actually, I cannot see the audiences. I'm Sujin Kim, and I have a background in DAO building and collaboration at Spore DAO. Spore DAO is a sister DAO of Fractal Ventures, which is a host of this DAO docu. So we are working together to spread our Daoist philosophy, which is quite distinguishable of that of DAO West. So actually, we are hosting another event called Soulbound right next week after this DAO docu and it docu. So if any of you are interested, you are more than welcome to join us. And ever since I participated in DAO ecosystem, I've heard all sorts of English accents via Discord weekly call. So today, I'm excited to share my real Korean accent with you guys. So after all, embracing diversity is the way of being a Daoist. So please understand and hope that everyone gets accustomed to my different sounds of English. So, all right, everyone, now let's dive deep into our topic for today, DAO collaboration. So we Daoists have jumped into the DAO rabbit hole with the belief that DAO is an ideal organization that can enabling the new type of collaboration and empowering all the humans. So, however, reality falls short. And now we are stuck in the kind of DAO dilemma regarding DAO collaboration. But fear not, we are here to discuss how DAOs can overcome this issue and ensure effective collaboration processes. So now let's meet our amazing panelists who are experts in navigating this type of tricky parts of DAO collaboration. So first up, we have Du from Cyber Lab. Du, could you introduce yourself a little bit?
Yep, sure. Sounds like I also have the Korean accent, so it'll be two accents, I assume. And then I think it's the first time that we're having a panel in the middle, kind of looks like a bar. I like the feeling. But so, yes, nice to meet you. So my name is Du. I'm a co-founder and also CEO at Stable Lab, as well as for the border in the committee for MakerDAO as well. So for Stable Lab, we work with almost 20 protocols from Maker to Uniswap to Compound, helping with this governance, whether that's through delegate or consulting or others. So excited to meet everyone.
Thank you. Next, Kavya, please.
Hey everyone, I'm Kavya from India. I think we have a very diverse panel this time. I run this organization called Lumos Labs. What we essentially do is help developers find global opportunities in Web3. We've been running hackathons, accelerator programs, and such for over 4 years now. And late last year, we decided to build our own product that sort of builds out an engagement layer for developers. So think of experiential world for developers where they get to build their own profiles, have their own identities, and also look out for opportunities and collaborate with one another. And we look at decentralizing that and turning that into a DAO, something like what Decentraland was exploring, but obviously there are a lot of learnings from there, so we'd like to implement that in the future. But that's a little bit about me.
Thanks. Hi, guys. Okay. Hi, I'm Leah. So I am the content strategist at Aragon. I'm part of the Growth Guild. Essentially, what I do is I handle most of the co-marketing initiatives and collaborations for comms internally and externally. Essentially, Aragon just launched their new tech stack at East Denver. So it now consists of the new Aragon app, which allows you to build a DAO with only 4 steps. So within minutes, you can create a DAO. It also now costs less than $1. It's actually less than 50 cents to deploy a DAO, create a proposal, and execute it. So you have no reason to not be on chain anymore. And we also have Aragon OS X, which is our new protocol, which allows you to create plugins and integrate it with your DAO so that you can adjust your governance methods, because again, no DAO is the same. And we also have our education portal, because we notice like a lot of people want to launch DAOs, but once they launch it, they don't know what to do. They don't know how to choose the right governance frameworks. They don't even know how to write proposals that are effective and will most likely get approval. So we've created an education portal to help guide DAOs to succession. So yeah, it's been 5 years, I think 6 years since we launched, and it's been a lot of like heads down building and working and iterating, because we were one of the first DAO platforms, and it was just a lot of research, but we're finally ready, and we have a great product, so can't wait to dive into that later.
Thank you, Leah. So please, Martin, introduce yourself.
Hi, yeah, my name is Martin. I'm with a protocol called Q. You can find everything on Q at q.org. What Q does is essentially providing a governance layer for other protocols to build on. So technically it's a layer 1 blockchain, but it provides infrastructure that other DAOs, protocols, as well even companies can build on. So think of it as what a nation state does to companies, Q provides for decentralized protocols.
So today we are talking about DAO collaboration. So I brought some classic collaboration tool, which is Sketchbook, for audiences to effectively understand the flow of a conversation. But I didn't expect that type of stage. I'm gonna ask you guys some questions regarding DAO collaboration, and you guys can take turns and share your insights. All right. So actually, the panel members gave me a keyword in advance. So today, these keywords serve as the key takeaway for this conference, because this is the essence of their thought. So the first question here is about the defining DAO collaboration. So how would you define DAO collaboration, and what aspects do you think are the most important to consider when it comes to fostering collaboration within a DAO or between DAOs, DAO to DAO collaboration, something like that, like Spur DAO and Fractal Ventures. So in sitting order, could you take the first?
Yes, and also I think it's a pretty interesting question and also difficult question, right? Because we like to say DAOs as a certain category, but even, especially among different DAOs, they're different, right? And then even within the DAO, like there are different groups, right? Like for example, some might have working groups, some might have foundation. Really depends, right? But so the reason why I say one of the important part will be trust. Now, for DAOs, in theory, it should not be based on trust, right? The idea was that everything should be based on smart contract. You don't need to trust. Who knows, maybe he or she might be a cat and it still works technically, right, behind the screen. But in reality, we realized that that kind of element of trust is still very important, because especially when you're transitioning into more decentralized DAO, you do need to have that trust to ensure the transition is smooth. So that also connects to transparency, right? So the thing is that like if you have to trust somebody, it's much easier to trust when you can see everything, right? And then especially in DAOs, they can be transparent from, for example, progress. As, so for example, if it's a proposal, they can see how the proposal is going through. If it's treasury, they can see who's managing the treasury, how the treasury is spent. In some DAOs, they can even see, for example, how the money is spent and their salaries. It does kind of lead to some tricky questions, but I do think that those also help to increase the trust as well. And then the last point also connects to that is the accountability, right? So what if, for example, there's transparency, but let's say somebody behaved in a way that doesn't earn somebody's trust, then there needs to be also a way to make sure that they are held accountable, whether that's either punishment or that's like a future, let's say, that kind of engagement. So it's important to have those three to ensure the collaboration is smooth, and also it goes in a way that can be improved in the future.
Thanks, Stu. I was surprised that next to the do we have a caveat, and caveat gives the exactly aligned with the keywords. The first is transparency and trust, and the other point is also important: incentive and conflict resolution. So I was wondered if you have a kind of conflict when you operate your DAO, something like that. Can you explain on this keyword?
Yeah, for sure. So in terms of conflict, this is hypothetical, right? Like what DAO mentioned. Now, when we talk about transparency, everybody who is participating or is a part of this DAO needs to know exactly how that DAO operates or what they're there for. But with transparency, is too much transparency a good thing or a bad thing? That's where conflicts kind of arise, right? When you kind of see other people's, payrolls, right? And then there is always a question that, hey, why is this person getting paid more than I am when we are doing the same job? How do we find a way to kind of make transparency the key aspect of collaboration with some sort of privacy layers to it, right? That's so important for collaborative DAO to work, and especially for it to not break down, right? And more conflicts coming up would lead to a DAO kind of closing out, right? It wouldn't lead to a successful DAO or a long-term DAO. Apart from that, incentivizing everybody in the right manner is very, very important. But that again, right, is transparency there, again, a good thing or a bad thing? So these are questions, honestly, I don't think anybody has the answers to, and we still have to find the solution for. But if we do find the solutions to these four things, I think we have a very collaborative DAO inside.
So then let's move on to the Leah's perspective.
Yes. So I would define it with governance and execution and communication. So there are both on-chain and off-chain components that are important for this. And I'm going to take this from Aragon's experience. So we shifted to a DAO. We announced it this year. You might know us as Aragon Project or Aragon Association, but we are now Aragon DAO. And it was very difficult because we have 300 million in our treasury. We have thousands of community members. Our DAO needs were so different. And one day, someone came into our forum and was like, you need to shift to a DAO. You are the biggest DAO platform. Why are you not a DAO? You need to lead by example. And that was such an insane challenge for us. And it took a year. It actually took us a year to finally find a governance framework that works for us. And so we are now Aragon DAO, and what we learned, let's start with governance first. So how does a DAO make decisions? So this can be a mix of formal on-chain voting and informal mechanisms such as forum discussion, strategy iteration, and coalition. So we actually documented our transition into a DAO on our blog. So you can find our current governance framework there and how we came to that. And we basically built rules and guidelines to follow for when we become a DAO, which we are now, and we are following now. So next is execution. How do we deliver value now that we are a DAO? So once a DAO decides what goals it is trying to accomplish, what strategy it will follow, and how it allocates resources, how do you accomplish work? So we do this with we have bi-monthly all hands meetings where each guild goes in and updates each other on what work they're doing. We try to break it down in lows, highs, and blockers, just to identify which guild is blocking who, how can we fix this right now. We also have offsites because it's we learned that it's easier to strategize in person. I know Web3 is like, oh, we're all remote, but like offsites have been amazing for us. We do it quarterly, highly recommend, and also cross-functional coordination. So sometimes if like we are in town with another coworker, we always try to meet up, and we always try to go to these events together. So yeah, and also lastly, communication. How does a DAO communicate and stay up to date? We also launched a community newsletter to help people know where we're speaking, what decisions we're making on the forum. And also we have segmented newsletters for things developers only want to know because they don't like they won't be interested in certain things as well. And also our Twitter account, and just being on top of your narrative. Because the thing is, your narrative is what inspires your community. And if you have like specific keywords that you feed them, this is what guides them on your mission and like keeps them focused on going towards that same goal. So yeah, that's it for me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your insight, and thanks for Aragon to decided to move to the DAO. So you can be Aragon can be a huge benchmark for any type of DAOs. So moving to the next, we have Martin. Martin's keywords is relatively very similar to the very typical organization missions. So can you add an explanation on this keyword?
Yeah, so I have 3 points, and I think for all of them, clarity is what I would say helps DAOs to achieve what they set out to achieve. So the first is clarity of vision, clarity of purpose. So if you don't know what you want to achieve, then there is no chance of achieving it. Very simple. So having that discussion within the DAO, I think, is important. What you often see is that there is a mission shift or a vision shift along the way, which is totally fine. But be explicit about it, discuss it within your community. Otherwise, I think you will run in trouble. Second one is roles and responsibilities. Also here, clarity is important. And the one point I want to make here is that not everyone needs to decide everything. I think there is a natural tendency of DAOs that they want to involve the community, which is great. By all means, do it. But that doesn't mean that everyone should talk about everything and decide on everything. So think about specialization. Think about defining roles and responsibilities. I think that is a big factor in success for DAOs. The last point I want to make is not a fun one, so apologies for bringing up a topic that maybe many people don't want to deal with, but I think is very important, which is legal and regulatory clarity. So what I observe is that many DAOs run into troubles because they're not sure what their legal and regulatory status is. And that just leads to very awkward situations where people want to say things but feel they can't, or people do say things, write things on forums, and are worried about liability, which I think is important, which is absolutely relevant. So do make an effort to clarify things. There is not one solution that fits everyone. With Q, we're providing some clarification for DAOs that they can use, that they can piggyback on. But again, it's very specific to the DAO, to the purpose, and what the DAO is actually doing. But do make an effort to clarify that. Otherwise, I think it can have very negative consequences.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of you in giving us the definition of DAO collaboration. And suddenly I got now the DAOs are getting bigger and bigger. Now at the first time we thought that DAO is some kind of flat organization, something like that. But now we got more structuralized as time goes. So I'm curious, what is the difference between the big size of the DAO and some big size of the traditional organization? If any of you, can you share your insight on this question?
Yeah, sure. And I think it really depends on the DAO. And then I think that's the kind of common concept / misconcept about DAO, right? Like all DAOs are different, as well as like how decentralized or mature they are. But I'll say that especially for very big DAOs compared to traditional company, I actually wouldn't say they're more efficient. In many ways, a lot of the decisions, the question becomes who's the decision maker, right? And then I think a lot of DAOs would be like, well, the decision maker is technically their holders, right? Like token holders. Yes, true. But at the same time, in a lot of more efficient DAOs, there will be somebody like decision maker, right? Like it can be somebody like a CEO or leadership, or at least some kind of council, right? That makes those decisions more efficiently. But if they don't have such, then in reality, a lot of them are more inefficient because in reality, for a lot of the big companies, they negotiate, right? And they kind of sometimes negotiate behind closed doors, which is not transparent, but can be very efficient. In big DAOs, in theory, all of it should be public. And then it becomes like, is it fair? Like, is it like, does it make sense? And then it just, I mean, that's why I say that we don't need to watch Netflix, right? There's like drama and then new seasons every time. Watching Game of Thrones does help with DAO governance. That's how I learned it. So yes, I would say that that's kind of one big difference.
Yeah, I understand. The transparency is the key feature of DAO. So any other can add on this question or moving to another topic? Yeah, so. So next question I prepared is about challenges and potential solutions when it comes to DAO collaboration. It's been more than 5 or 6 years that DAO is happening to our real world. So there are a lot of pros and cons. So before that, I prepared some funny memes when it comes to DAO collaboration, which is called DAO ship problem. Have you heard about this? Have you ever seen this kind of meme? So imagine there is a group of people who is a DAO run ship, and suddenly they realize there's a hole in the floor, but instead of working together to fix the problem, chaos breaks out. So everybody is too busy delivering their one message rather than collaborating smoothly. So I think this is kind of typical challenges DAO is fronting. So could you give us some your opinion about this, or if there's any other type of challenge, please share with us along with the potential solution to it. So as always, let's take turn. Starting from you, could you explain on your keywords on the challenges of the DAO?
Yep, sure. And I'm sorry that I'm talking too long, so I'm just gonna make it short. But I do think that there's definitely bias as well, because we like to talk about DAOs, but in reality, a lot of DAOs actually disappeared because they couldn't overcome those challenges. So DAOs that are still here, or those organizations that became DAO, for example, like Aragon or like Maker or others, like we, in a way, are the kind of survivor bias, right? Like we are able to overcome a lot of those challenges to be still here. But in reality, a lot of DAOs didn't even kind of make it so far. So some of the key challenges, I would say there's 3. One of them is distrust, which is kind of opposite from how we talk about the collaboration, right? And then distrust can actually play in many different roles, right? Because in reality, it's not just based on smart contract, right? You have to trust people, especially in terms of like managing treasury. And then it also becomes that as DAOs become more transparent, it actually kind of exposes the kind of unfairness. So people start to distrust each other, right? So whether that's like, oh, I don't think that I'm getting paid enough, or whether it's about the difference in like power or like structure. And then once you have the distrust, then it makes the process much more difficult, because then it also becomes so there's, let's say, people who are building to be like be the watchman. Then who watches the watchman, and then who watches the watchman of the watchman? It just becomes that kind of turtles all the way down, and then it just becomes like, okay, well then we need and then that kind of becomes a hierarchy, right? Because then it becomes, because we don't trust them, so we need to have somebody that rides it. But it also happens that like because they made decisions that we are not happy with, then we should also have somebody that kind of watch over them. It just becomes like everybody watching each other, become KGB, like a Cold War stuff. And then and then what happens? Usually they're like, okay, you know what? They're being corrupt, so we're just gonna fork it, and then we're just gonna create a new one. And then we saw that with like some of the DAOs, right? Like where people leave or they decide to create their own. Like, so I think that this kind of distrust has been very And then to solve it, I would say that it's actually not easy. Like I like to say that there's one solution that can solve all, but we are human nature. Like even in traditional companies, right? Even in like big companies that became Fortune 500, like this kind of conflict happens, right? So it really becomes like, okay, you have to be transparent, but you also have to have like the same vision, or at least, even if you have a different vision, there needs to be a way for them to express it and also respect it. And I think it's really important that like for strong DAOs, there needs to be a culture where they respect the voting decision, whether they agree or disagree. Because if you're in this voting like a culture where like, okay, yes, like let's say those token holders decide to make something or like decide to something, but we're not gonna respect that because token holders, they're not really interested. They might be slightly dumb or not interested or something like that. Then that's where a lot of conflict happens, right? Because if you rely on, let's say, token holders to be a decision maker, then it's a little bit easier. But if you don't agree with that, then that's also where this kind of conflict kind of prolongs, right? So second part, which relate to that, is about the coordination failure, which is also related to decision making, right? Who needs to make a decision? Like, for example, let's say you're a DAO. It's a bear market. People are like, oh, easy, it's gonna go back to 50. Everybody's having hamburger instead of steak and wagyu, right? So now that they need to cut people, how do you decide who to cut? Is it gonna be like some kind of Squid Game where they have to go and fight for it? Or is it gonna be like a coordination and a discussion? And that's actually a really, really serious problem in a lot of DAOs, right? And actually, a lot of DAOs that we work with had the opposite problem, where like during the bull market, they would be like, okay, let's hire this and this. There was no real team that would be like, okay, we need to check on this, right? Because it kind of became like, who's the decision maker? So I think it's really important to be like, whether it can be the token holders, it can be somebody like committee, it can be council, whoever it is, they need to be like, okay, we will respect their decision and they will trust their expertise. Because once you don't have that, the coordination becomes much more difficult, especially on decisions that are like, because hiring people is kind of easy, right? Everybody feels good. We have new members, like, oh, our family is growing. But then when you have to cut people, it's like really painful. And that's something that you need to be like, okay, you know what? We need to make this decision and we need to respect it, and some people need to go, that kind of thing. So that's why it's also important. And the last part, security, is actually something that a lot of DAOs kind of don't see, but it has been like a source of conflict, such also source of downfall, where like, because either they trust the system so much, or they just trust like, oh yeah, our code has been audited like 3 years ago. It's like, and then they add new things, and then they realize that it has been hacked, right? And then it happens very often, but this is also a crucial point where a lot of DAOs need to make sure that this is solved, right? Because whether they're giving more responsibility or whether it's giving them more treasury or others, like they need to make sure that the security is in place so that even if such conflict happens, there's a way to kind of mitigate it. This also applies to, for example, transferring treasury, right? It also happened with like Maker, where like, for example, we're like, oh yeah, we trust them, so here's $1 million. And yeah, I mean, if they don't spend it, they're gonna return it. No, they don't return it. They just keep it, and they decide to buy some nice wagyu with it. I don't know, right? It actually did happen. So like I think those are very important as well.
So next is the caveat keyword, and which is also aligned with the dude's perspective as well. So caveat, could you explain on your keywords?
Yeah, so before I get into the keyword that I've given, there's another very important bit I missed in yesterday's discussion that we had, right? So I was reading this article by Vitalik about DAOs, his view of why DAO should exist, right? And he says that there are two types of people who have a concave decision mindset and a convex decision mindset. Everyone who's read that article knows what it's about. So if it's a convex mindset, here's an example, right? During the pandemic, there was this, there were travel regulations set in. So either someone puts in no travel like ban, or you give 100% travel, right? If you were to make it a 50 or 90% travel regulation, then there's total chaos. People don't know where to go. If they're going, are they allowed to go? So that creates a lot of confusion. In this case, it makes sense for people to have a central decision made, right? That, hey, we're making this decision and this is what you need to follow because we want to avoid chaos during, a whole pandemic. A concave mindset is when you need to find like a middle ground, and you need more views on certain issues. For example, maybe in a court where there is some sort of judgment being made on a person, there are two judges making extreme views, and either of them are unfair, right? One says, put them in jail forever, and the other one says, let them go for free. But we need to find like a middle ground, and we need more views at that point. It can't be subjective, right? That's the concave mindset. Now, to be a part of a DAO, it makes sense to have that concave mindset. It makes sense to have that, find the gray area and never, go black and white, because that's not always the solution. One of the biggest challenges I've seen in DAOs is when you join a DAO, you aren't joining just an organization where you're like working and getting a salary. You need to actually feel like you belong. You need to really, really believe in the vision. You need to believe in the mission, and you need to work for yourself. So you need to be accountable. If that bit isn't there, DAOs usually tend to fail, right? So that is one of the biggest challenges I've seen. When you do not have a particular objective and accountability to the job that you're doing in a DAO, it tends to fail, and that's one of the biggest challenges. One of the solutions is obviously educating people, letting them know, and there are different people for different things, so you don't necessarily have to be a DAO person. But I think you need to figure out before joining a DAO, right? It shouldn't be something that you do and, just try to while away your time in a DAO just because you're getting money and, everything is transparent, so people can't really kick you out that easy. That's one of the biggest challenges. The second thing is obviously technical. So design, scalability, and security. Scalability, because as you just asked the last question, right? Like DAOs are growing. Now, when they grow, it gets so much harder and so much more inefficient for a DAO to sort of come to a consensus. So how do you do that? How do you resolve for this, right? And we need better solutions and better models and infrastructure to be built out for the same. In terms of design, again, right? How does the mechanism entirely work? It doesn't have to be the DAO's problem. It could be an infrastructure company that actually comes up with the solution, but we definitely do need that solution. The last thing is security, of course, and taking the example of the DAO, which was the first Ethereum DAO, which did have a hack because there was a bug in the smart contract, and there was so much money that was siphoned off. And before they could even find out that vulnerability. This also led to a very, very bad connotation to DAOs altogether, and that sort of led to a lot of people kind of talking slack about DAOs when this could be the future. It may not be the entire future, but this could be the future, right? So we should definitely take care of that. And there are a lot of funds within DAOs, so security is of utmost importance.
All right, so since we are running out of time almost, let's move quickly. So
Okay. Yes, so touching on technical challenges, deploying a DAO on-chain has made it difficult for organizations to adapt. And the biggest challenge I would identify for DAOs is uncertainty. We don't know what kind of DAOs and governance models will be successful and sustainable with the environment being so uncertain and unpredictable. So that's why our ethos now is essentially experimenting with governance at the speed of software, because our answer to this is experimentation. And our new tech stack is supposed to solve that. So the Aragon app essentially is for orgs coming into Web3. They can build a DAO within 4 easy steps, and then they can essentially customize it based on their needs. And then Aragon OS X, our new protocol, which allows you to create new plugins and plug in and play and just adjust based on your DAO's needs, whether you grow into a community of like 10,000 or so on. There will be ways to change and customize. And I think I'll just stop at that so you can go.
Okay,
Yeah.
moving to the next, Martin.
Okay, so challenges of DAOs, of course, are many, and essentially it's all about governance, right? So DAOs are a mechanism to coordinate and to govern groups or projects. And I want to introduce a framework that we've implemented on the Q protocol, but I believe is applicable for any DAO. 3 simple elements that you need to have for any governance mechanism to be effective. And the basics are simple, but implementation is hard. So let me go through those 3 steps. The first one is you need a rule set, that governs your DAO. And that can take many shapes or forms. It can be implicit, which works well for maybe social DAOs, for coherent groups where everyone kind of knows what they want. It can be very formalized. DAO constitutions are now coming up. I mean, MakerDAO is one example. SafeDAO, many big protocols are now implementing constitutions, which is one way to implement a rule set. But no matter how you do it, if you don't know what the rule set is, then probably you're making a mistake because people will disagree on what the rule set is. Secondly, when you have a rule set, you need a mechanism of how to resolve disputes. Because whether you like it or not, disputes will come up, and if there is no clear way of how those are resolved, then you have civil war within the community, and that typically is not great. So, again, there is no single solution of how to resolve disputes. The Q protocol, we have a formal arbitration process that DAOs can use, that the protocol participants can use. There are other ways, but having a mechanism of how to resolve disputes is critical. The last one is, if you have a rule set, if you know how to resolve disputes, then how do you enforce those mechanisms? And I think this is maybe the most difficult ones and the ones where most DAOs fail. They have a rule set, they kind of manage to resolve disputes, but then what? And of course, if you don't know how to enforce your rules, it also means that it's much harder for people to follow the rules in the first place because they know, we can do whatever we want and nothing's going to happen. So we've heard examples of people just spending treasury, even though it was clear they shouldn't. But if you can't enforce misbehavior or can't penalize that effectively, then it's pretty much worthless. There are different mechanisms how that can be done, and I think a lot of work is being done on that issue. So, slashing of funds, you can have off-chain mechanisms, arbitration, even, getting to real-world assets. That's one way. Again, I think this is one of the areas where a lot of work still needs to be done in the DAO space. But it's important to have that because otherwise you don't really have an effective DAO.
Yeah, thank you for your insights. So we are almost running out of time now. So actually my last question is for the future DAO builders. So let's make a quick statement. What is the one thing that you'd like to recommend when it comes to build a DAOist in the initial phase of DAO?
Yeah, actually my recommendation would be don't build a DAO for a lot of DAO builders. Like, I know that it sounds weird, and it's like, why would I say it? I'm not drunk, don't worry. But the reason why I say it is like, for a lot of times, if you talk to them why they want to build a DAO, it's mostly for they're like, oh, well, because we don't do funding and the token holders get to make decision. Like, no, that's not the point of DAO itself, right? Like, DAOs are also whether that's like research or others, like there needs to be more done. But I think that I'm just worried that a lot of people, they like to think that they want to build a DAO so that they can raise money and maybe get away with it. Like, I don't think that there should be especially the progress that we need to make. So I'll say a lot of for DAO builders, the answer is don't build it. But if you want to build it, rethink, really do research and then think about is this actually, does this structure actually need a DAO? Ask yourself. So that's would be my suggestion, even before thinking about building a DAO.
Mm-hmm. Next, Kavya.
Dude, you stole my line. Anyway, very similar thoughts, right? If a decision costs a lot, don't build a DAO, right? You need to make sure that when you make decisions, because in DAOs, they can be inefficient, they can take time, and when these sort of, requirements are there, don't build a DAO, right? Because you actually do need a centralized system for that. Now, if you have a vision in mind, please research and then find out if this actually does require a DAO. We don't have to make everything decentralized, and everything does not have to be a DAO.
Actually, the slogan for the DAO Tokyo is just DAO it, but all the planners are don't do DAO. So
Okay, I am not on the same team. I am team build a DAO. So start simple and iterate. Like you can test governance models if you want, and just leave room for discoverability and adaptability. Like feel free to adjust. There are tools now that let you do that. Okay, and then explore resources. So before we launched our tech stack, we didn't really have, like we had our old product, but that was clunky. And in the meantime, in those 5 years, we created DAO educational resources. So it's our DAO education portal. And we also have DAO experts. So we partnered with Indie DAO, Solidity Guild, and all these big DAOs to provide newer DAOs tools that they would need to succeed. And we also did a Ukraine course. So if anyone here is from Ukraine, we launched a course with them to educate their citizens on DAOs. So there's so much resources now that exist. I am like from a content perspective, when I came into DAOs, like the only thing you could find was like, what is a DAO? And the level of DAO knowledge was stuck there for so long. And now you can find like how to choose proper governance models, how to choose which blockchain is right for you based on your DAO's needs. So yeah, build a DAO. There are resources to help you make these decisions. And lastly, join DAO builder communities if you need more help. You can join our Discord if you need assistance, and someone would love to help you out there.
Yeah, and last but not least, I really look forward to the Martin's perspective. It's really interesting.
So I'm also going to be on the Do Build a DAO camp. So it's a 50-50, but I hear what you're saying, and I do get the point. So having said that, my one word of advice to be short and respectful of time, I'm going to misquote Albert Einstein, who once said, make things as simple as possible, but not any simpler. And this is a very deep thought. You know, you can also spend the afternoon thinking about that, what that means. But I want to change it a little bit and say automate what you can automate, but not anymore. Meaning that blockchain, crypto, smart contracts offer amazing possibilities in terms of how we can coordinate as humans. And what you can do, what you couldn't do before really, is automate decisions or make them, well, technically binding. So smart contracts can go a long way in providing governance infrastructure and improving governance. But at a certain point, they will not help you anymore. And our motto is with Q, beyond code is law. So you need to think about what you do beyond that point where smart contracts don't do the job. And getting that point right is, I think, a challenge. But if you get it right, it's amazing. So thinking about what can be coded, what can be implemented in a technically binding way, but then also thinking about what happens beyond that point. How do you resolve conflict? All the other points. There is a point where code doesn't help, and you need a solution for that.
All right. So now I think we have to wrap up our panel talks. So everyone join me in giving the panelists big round of applause for sharing these valuable insights. Thank you so much.